Tonight we will go on a journey to uncover the wisdom of Zen Buddhism through gentle stories and simple teachings. These aren't complex philosophies or difficult ideas to grasp, but simple truths about discovering the peace that has never left. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The teachings we'll explore tonight have been passed down through generations of Zen masters, not as rules to follow or goals to achieve, but as invitations to see clearly what's already here. Each story, each insight is like a gentle finger pointing at the moon. Not the moon itself, but a direction to look. Zen Buddhism reminds us that peace isn't something we must search for in distant places or future moments. It's available right here, right now, in this very breath. The relaxation you're seeking isn't far away. It's as close as your willingness to stop fighting with this moment and simply be present to it. Everything you need for deep rest is already here. These teachings will simply help you recognize what's been present all along. Relax, take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. One of the most helpful discoveries in Zen Buddhism is understanding what the mind actually is. We often think of our mind as something we should control, something that should behave in certain ways. But Zen teaching suggests something different. The mind is more like the sky than like a machine we operate. The sky doesn't try to control the weather that moves through it. Clouds come and go, rain falls. Sunshine breaks through, storms pass. The sky simply allows all of this to happen without resistance, and underneath all the changing weather, the sky itself remains clear and spacious. Your mind works the same way. Thoughts come and go like clouds. Emotions rise and fall like weather patterns. Sensations appear and disappear like passing rain. And beneath all this movement, awareness itself remains unchanged. This understanding brings a particular kind of peace. When we stop trying to control our mental weather and instead learn to rest in the sky of awareness, something relaxes. In a monastery near the sea, there lived a monk named Tao who was known for his constant frustration with his own mind. During meditation, he would become angry at his wandering thoughts. During work periods, he would berate himself for getting distracted. He treated his mind like an unruly student that needed harsh discipline. "My mind is my enemy," he would tell other monks. "It never stays where I put it. It wanders constantly. I try to make it still, but it refuses to cooperate." One day the monastery's teacher, Master Genzo, invited Tao to sit with him on the cliff overlooking the ocean. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the waves roll in and out. "What do you see?" Genzo finally asked. "I see the ocean," Tao replied. "Is the ocean trying to control the waves?" Tao paused. "No, the waves just happen. They're a part of what the ocean does. And does the ocean become angry when waves appear instead of staying flat? No, that would be silly. Waves are the nature of the ocean." Genzo nodded. "Your mind is the same. Thoughts are what mind does, the way waves are what ocean does. Fighting against thoughts is like the ocean fighting against waves, but surely I should be able to control my mind." Tao protested. "Otherwise, what's the point of meditation?" "Meditation isn't about controlling thoughts," Genzo said. "It's about recognizing the awareness that watches thoughts come and go. This awareness is like the deep still water beneath the surface. The waves don't disturb it." Over the following weeks, Tao began to experiment with this new understanding. Instead of fighting his thoughts during meditation, he watched them the way he had watched the ocean waves. Some thoughts were big and dramatic like storm waves. Others were small and gentle like ripples. But all of them came and went on their own. He noticed something remarkable. When he stopped trying to control his thoughts, they actually settled down naturally. It was as if his effort to force stillness had been creating the very agitation he was trying to stop. One morning during meditation, a disturbing memory arose. In the past, Tao would have pushed it away immediately, creating an internal battle. This time he simply watched the memory appear, stay for a moment, and then dissolve on its own. It was like watching a cloud drift across the sky. "Master Genzo," he said later, "I think I understand now. The problem was my thoughts. The problem was my relationship with my thoughts." "Yes," Genzo replied. "When we fight with our mind, we create two problems where there was only one, the thought itself and our struggle against it." This teaching about the mind's natural movement is central to Zen Buddhism's approach to peace. Most of us have been taught to view thoughts as something we should control. Good thoughts should be encouraged. Bad thoughts should be eliminated. The mind should be disciplined into proper behavior. But Zen suggests this entire approach creates unnecessary suffering. Thoughts are natural phenomena, no more good or bad than weather is good or bad. A rainy day isn't morally inferior to a sunny day, it's just weather. Similarly, a worried thought isn't morally inferior to a peaceful thought. It's just mental weather. The question isn't how to have only sunny mental weather. The question is how to remain at peace regardless of what weather appears. In another region, there was a farmer named Hiroshi who discovered this truth through his work in the rice fields. Hiroshi had always been a worrier. He worried about the weather, about the harvest, about his family's future. His mind was constantly generating concerns and anxieties. One season, a severe drought threatened the entire region's rice crop. Hiroshi found himself consumed with worry. He would lie awake at night, thinking about all the terrible things that might happen. He would walk through his fields imagining disaster. An old monk named Teshu lived in a small temple at the edge of Hiroshi's village. One day he came to visit the worried farmer. "Your rice is dying from lack of water," Teshu observed, looking at the dry fields. "Yes," Hiroshi said miserably. "And there's nothing I can do about it. I can't make it rain." "No, you can't make it rain," Teshu agreed. "But tell me, does your worry about the drought help your rice grow?" "No, of course not." "Does your worry bring rain?" "No." "Does your worry make you feel better?" "No. It makes me feel terrible." "So your worry accomplishes nothing except making you suffer." Hiroshi had to admit this was true. His constant worrying wasn't helping the situation at all. It was just adding mental suffering to an already difficult circumstance. Your worry is like the drought. Teshu said both are conditions that have arisen. You can't control the weather, and you can't completely control the arising of worried thoughts. But you can choose whether to water those thoughts with your attention. "I don't understand." "The thoughts just come." Yes, thoughts come on their own, but notice what happens after they arrive. Do you just observe the worried thought, or do you pick it up and carry it around all day? Do you feed it with more thoughts, build stories around it, imagine terrible futures? Hiroshi realized that his worry wasn't just a single thought. It was a whole pattern of thinking he was actively maintaining. A worried thought would appear, and then he would elaborate on it. Imagine worst-case scenarios. Rehearse conversations about disaster. He was taking a simple thought and building an entire suffering structure around it. "So, what should I do when worried thoughts come?" Hiroshi asked. "Watch them the way you watch clouds," Tessu replied. "A cloud appears in the sky, you notice it, you don't try to push it away or hold on to it, you just let it pass. Worried thoughts are the same, they appear. You notice them, and if you don't feed them with attention, they pass on their own." Clear's throat over the next few weeks, Hiroshi practiced this approach. When a worried thought about the drought would arise, he would notice it the way he might notice a bird flying overhead. There's a worried thought. He would observe without diving into elaborating on it or arguing with it. Something unexpected happened. The worried thoughts didn't stop coming entirely, but they didn't consume him anymore. They would arise, linger briefly, and then fade away, and without the constant mental suffering, Hiroshi found he had more energy to do the things that actually helped, like digging deeper wells and organizing the village to share water resources. The rains eventually came. The rice was saved. But Hiroshi had learned something more valuable than how to survive a drought. He had learned how to be at peace, even when difficult thoughts arose. This insight about not feeding our thoughts connects to a deeper understanding. In Zen Buddhism, our suffering often comes not from our circumstances, or even from our initial thoughts about circumstances, but from what we do with those thoughts after they arise. A thought appears. This is natural and often beyond our control. But then we have a choice. We can observe the thought and let it pass, or we can grab onto it and build an entire mental world around it. Imagine you're sitting quietly and a thought arises. I made a mistake at work today. This is just a simple thought, a cloud passing through the sky of awareness. But watch what often happens next. We grab the thought. We replay the mistake in detail. We imagine what our co-workers are thinking. We predict negative consequences. We remember similar mistakes from years ago. We create stories about being incompetent. We rehearse conversations where we defend ourselves. Before long, that single simple thought has become an elaborate mental drama that can last for hours or even days. This is what Zen Buddhism means by feeding our thoughts. We take a passing cloud and build a storm system around it. In a mountain temple, there was a young monk named Ren who struggled terribly with anger. Small irritations would set him off. A fellow monk would make a thoughtless comment, and Ren would be angry for hours. Someone would interrupt his meditation, and he would silently rage. His teacher, Master Hakuan, watched this pattern with concern. One day he asked Ren to help him in the garden. As they worked, Hakuan deliberately bumped into Ren, spilling soil on his clean robe. Ren felt anger flash through him immediately. His jaw clenched. His mind began generating angry thoughts. He's so careless, he did that on purpose. He has no respect for my efforts. But before Ren could say anything, Hakuin asked, "What just happened? You spilled soil on me," Ren replied, trying to keep his voice even. "And what happened inside you? I felt angry." Feel angry or still feeling angry? Ren paused. The initial flash of anger, that split-second surge, had actually already passed. What remained was his thinking about being angry. "I'm thinking angry thoughts," he admitted. So the anger itself lasted maybe 1 second. Hakuan observed, "But you're planning to carry it around all day. You're building a story about my carelessness, imagining what you'll say to me, rehearsing your grievances. All of this is you, not me." This hit Ren hard. The original anger was a natural reaction, a flash of feeling that came and went in an instant. But the suffering he experienced, the hours of resentment he carried, that was all his own doing. He was taking a 1-second experience and extending it indefinitely through his own thinking. The first arrow is pain. Hakuin said, "Someone hurts you, something goes wrong, a difficulty arises." This first arrow is often unavoidable, but the second arrow is the one you shoot yourself with your reactions, your stories, your refusal to let the moment pass. This second arrow creates most of your suffering. From that day forward, Ren began to distinguish between the first arrow and the second. When anger flashed, he would note it. There's anger, but he stopped building elaborate stories around it. The anger would arise, last for its natural duration, and then pass away. Other monks noticed the change in Ren. He became known for his evenness of temperament, not because he never felt anger anymore, but because he had learned to let it pass through without adding fuel to it. This distinction between the first arrow and the second arrow is one of Zen Buddhism's most practical teachings. We will encounter difficulties. Life will present us with moments that trigger fear, anger, sadness, frustration. These initial reactions are natural and often unavoidable. They're the first arrow. But then we have a choice. We can let these reactions pass like weather, or we can grab onto them and create elaborate structures of suffering around them. This is the second arrow, and unlike the first, it's optional. As you prepare for rest tonight, you might notice the thoughts that arise. Some will be pleasant, some will be uncomfortable, some will be neutral. All of them are just mental weather, clouds passing through the sky of awareness. You don't need to control which thoughts appear. You don't need to push away the uncomfortable ones or cling to the pleasant ones. You can simply let them all pass, the way the sky allows all weather to move through without resistance. There's another aspect of mind that Zen Buddhism explores. Not just the thoughts that arise, but the awareness that notices them. This awareness is sometimes called the witness, the observer, or simply presence. A student once asked the great master Bodhidharma, "My mind is not at peace. Please pacify my mind." Bodhidharma replied, "Bring me your mind and I will pacify it." The student thought for a long time, trying to locate his mind, trying to grasp it and bring it forward. Finally, he said, "I cannot find my mind there, Bodhidharma said. I have pacified your mind." This exchange points to something profound. The mind we're looking for, the mind we think we need to control or pacify, can't actually be found as an object. What we find instead is awareness itself, which was never disturbed to begin with. Think about this moment right now. Thoughts are happening. You're aware of these words. Other sensations might be present, but what is it that's aware of all this? Can you locate the awareness itself? You can't find it as a thing, but you can't deny it's here. This awareness is what Zen Buddhism points to as our fundamental nature. It's not disturbed by thoughts any more than the sky is disturbed by clouds. It simply allows everything to appear and disappear within it. In a quiet monastery, a nun named Aiko spent years trying to achieve perfect mental stillness. She would sit for hours fighting against every thought that arose, trying to create a completely blank mind. She believed that enlightenment meant having no thoughts at all. Her teacher, an old woman named Shundo, watched this struggle with patient understanding. One day, she invited Akko to sit with her by a pond. "What do you see?" Shundo asked. "I see water," Akko replied. "I see the reflection of trees and sky. I see ripples from the wind. Is the water disturbed by these reflections?" Akko looked more carefully. The surface was moving, yes, but the water itself seemed unchanged by what appeared on it. "No," she said slowly. "The water reflects everything, but it's not changed by what it reflects. Your awareness is like this water," Shundo said. "It reflects everything. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, all of life's experiences. But it's not disturbed by what it reflects. You've been trying to stop the reflections, but the water doesn't need to do that. It's already peaceful, already clear, even while reflecting everything." This teaching changed Akko's entire practice. She stopped trying to achieve a blank mind, and instead learned to rest as the awareness that allowed all mental content to arise and pass. Her meditation became effortless, because she was no longer fighting with her own experience. Years later, students would ask Aiko how she had achieved such peace of mind. She would smile and say, "I stopped trying to achieve peace and recognized the awareness that was already peaceful." As you settle into rest tonight, you can explore this recognition yourself. Notice that you're aware. Notice that this awareness is here, regardless of what thoughts or feelings are present. Notice that it doesn't need thoughts to stop in order to be at peace. This awareness is like the deep ocean beneath surface waves. The waves are real. They're happening, but they don't disturb the depths. Similarly, your thoughts are real. They're happening, but they don't disturb the fundamental awareness that watches them. Zen Buddhism teaches that most of our mental suffering comes from forgetting this distinction. We identify with the waves and forget we're the ocean. We identify with thoughts and forget we're the awareness in which thoughts appear. Tonight, as thoughts arise, you can practice remembering. You can rest as the awareness that notices thoughts rather than identifying as the thinker of thoughts. This small shift in perspective often brings immediate relief. You don't need to make your mind stop thinking. You don't need to control your mental weather. You just need to recognize the space in which all weather appears, the awareness that remains untouched by whatever passes through it. This space, this awareness is already peaceful. It was peaceful before tonight, and it will be peaceful tomorrow. It doesn't depend on circumstances being right or thoughts being under control. It's your fundamental nature, always here, always available, always ready to welcome you home. One of the most profound teachings in Zen Buddhism is also one of the simplest. We are not who we think we are. The identity we carry, the story we tell about ourselves, the image we protect and polish, these things are real, but they are not the deepest truth of what we are. This understanding brings a particular kind of freedom. When we realize that our essential nature exists before and beneath all the labels we've collected, something in us can finally rest. Think about how much energy goes into being yourself each day. You wake up and immediately resume being the person you were yesterday. You maintain certain qualities, live up to certain expectations, protect certain aspects of your reputation. It's exhausting work that we rarely notice because we've been doing it for so long. Zen Buddhism invites us to discover what remains when this effort stops. Not to abandon our responsibilities or relationships, but to find the awareness that exists before we pick up the burden of being someone particular. In the mountains of ancient Japan, there lived a Zen monk named Taizen who had developed a peculiar reputation. People said he was either the wisest man in the region or completely mad. The confusion arose from a simple fact. Taizen could never remember his own name. When travelers would stop at his small temple seeking guidance, they would ask, "What is your name, master?" His answer changed every time. "I am called Hiroshi," he might say one day. The next week, to a different visitor, "My name is Kenzo." Sometimes he would pause, looking genuinely puzzled, and reply, "Not sure today. What would you like to call me?" One autumn, a scholar named Akira traveled from the capital specifically to meet this strange monk. Akira had spent his entire life building a reputation. He had written books, earned titles, collected acknowledgements from other scholars. His identity was carefully constructed and fiercely protected. When Akira arrived at the temple, he found Taizen sweeping leaves from the stone path. The monk looked up with a gentle smile. "Greetings," Akira said formally. "I am Akira of Kyoto, scholar of Buddhist texts, student of Master Dogen, author of 3 volumes on the sutras. I have come to speak with the monk." Taizen clears throat. The monk leaned on his broom and nodded. "Welcome, happy to speak with you. So you are Taizen?" Akira asked. The monk tilted his head thoughtfully. "Am I suppose if that's what you're looking for, then yes, you found him." Akira felt irritation rising. "Forgive me, but are you or aren't you?" The monk called Taizen. "This morning when I woke, I didn't have a name at all," the monk replied. "Then the baker came by and called me Taizen, so I answered to that yesterday. The children from the village called me Old Tree, because I was standing so still. I answered to that too. They sat together on the temple steps." Akira explained his confusion. "I don't understand how you can be so careless about your identity. I've spent years building my reputation. My name means something. When people hear it, they know my accomplishments." Taizen was quiet for a moment, watching leaves drift across the courtyard. "Tell me," he said, "when you were a baby, before you learned your name, were you less yourself?" "That's different. I didn't know anything then." "And when you're deep in sleep dreaming, do you introduce yourself to the people in your dreams?" Akira had to admit he didn't. In dreams, he simply existed without needing to establish identity. "The name Akira is useful," Taizen continued. "It helps people find you, address you, but it's not who you are. It's just a sound that points toward you. Notice how tightly you're holding on to the idea of being Akira the scholar. Notice how much energy that takes." The monk stood and returned to his sweeping. "I forget my name, not because I'm careless, but because I'm not carrying it everywhere I go. When someone needs a name to call me, one appears. When they don't, I'm simply here, sweeping, breathing, being." Akira spent 3 days at the temple. On the first day, when other visitors came, he introduced himself fully each time with his titles and credentials. On the second day, he found himself shortening it to just his name. On the third day, when a child asked who he was, He paused and realized he didn't know how to answer. Without his accomplishments and reputation, who was he? That evening, sitting with Tyson in silence, Akira began to sense something beneath all his accumulated identity. A simple awareness, a presence that had been there before he learned language, before he achieved anything, before he became someone. "I think I understand," Akira said quietly. "I've been so busy being Akira the scholar that I forgot about the awareness that was here before Akira existed." Tasan smiled. "And that awareness doesn't need credentials or reputation. It doesn't need to be protected or maintained. It simply is." When Akira returned to the capital, people noticed a change in him. He still wrote and taught, but there was a lightness about him that hadn't been there before. When asked about his time with the strange monk who couldn't remember his name, Akira would smile and say, "He taught me that the heaviest thing I was carrying was myself." This teaching about identity points to something Zen Buddhism calls our original nature. Before we learned our name, before we developed a personality, before we collected achievements and failures, something was already here. This fundamental awareness doesn't need improvement. It exists before effort, before becoming someone special. Many of us carry our identities like heavy coats we can never remove. We introduce ourselves not just with our names, but with everything we've done, everything we hope others will think of us. We defend these identities when they're questioned. We feel threatened when they're not recognized, but there's an exhausting quality to this constant maintenance. The self we've constructed requires endless attention. It needs to be fed with accomplishments, protected from criticism, displayed for approval. Consider how often your thoughts return to yourself, how you're being perceived, whether you're succeeding or failing, how you compare to others. This endless self-reference is like carrying a mirror everywhere, constantly checking your reflection to make sure you still look like who you think you should be. Zen practice offers relief from this constant self-monitoring, not by destroying the self or pretending we don't exist as individuals, but by discovering what remains when we stop working so hard at being someone. In another monastery far to the south, there was a young monk named Kenji who discovered this truth in a different way. Kenji was known as the most dedicated practitioner in his temple. He meditated longer than anyone else. He followed every rule perfectly. He could recite more sutras from memory than monks twice his age. Other students looked up to Kenji. Teachers praised his discipline. He had become known as the model monk, and he wore this identity with pride. One day, Kenji became ill with a fever that left him weak and unable to practice. For weeks, he couldn't sit in meditation. He couldn't attend ceremonies. He couldn't demonstrate any of the qualities that had defined him as the exemplary student. At first, this inability to practice filled him with anxiety. Without his rigorous schedule, without his reputation for dedication, who was he? His entire identity had been built on being the best practitioner, and suddenly he couldn't practice at all. He lay in the monastery infirmary, feeling like he had lost himself completely. One afternoon, the head monk Master Sen came to visit. "I failed," Kenji said, tears in his eyes. "I can't practice, I can't be I'm supposed to be." Master Soen sat beside his bed quietly. "Tell me," he said after a long pause. "Who is it that knows you can't practice right now?" Kenji was confused by the question. I know him too weak." "And this one who knows, is it practicing or not practicing? It's just aware that the body is weak." So awareness continues, even when Kenji, the perfect monk, cannot perform. Something shifted in Kenji's understanding. He had been so identified with his role, his reputation, his practices, that he had forgotten about the simple awareness beneath all of it. This awareness didn't need to accomplish anything. It was here whether he was meditating brilliantly or lying sick in bed. "The practices you've been doing are valuable," Master Soen continued, "but they were never meant to create who you are. They were meant to help you recognize what was already here before you started practicing." As Kenji recovered over the following weeks, his entire approach to Zen practice transformed. He still meditated and followed the temple routines, but he was no longer building an identity around them. He had discovered something that didn't need achievement to exist. Years later, when Kenji became a teacher, students were often surprised by his gentleness with those who struggled. Unlike many teachers who pushed their students toward greater effort and discipline, Kenji seemed to understand that trying too hard could become its own obstacle. "I learned something important when I was too sick to practice," he would tell them. "I learned that what we're looking for doesn't depend on our ability to perform. The harder we try to become enlightened, the more we reinforce the belief that we're not already complete." This insight about identity has a particular relevance as we prepare for rest. Many of us bring our identities to bed with us. We lie down still being the successful professional or the struggling artist or the devoted parent or whatever role defines us during the day. These roles are real. They matter. They shape how we move through the world. But they're not the deepest truth of what we are. There's another aspect to this teaching about self that Zen Buddhism explores. Not only do we construct identities around who we are, we also accumulate possessions, accomplishments, and experiences that we treat as extensions of ourselves. A wealthy merchant named Tanaka once visited a Zen master named Ryoan, who lived in a small hut on the edge of a forest. Tanaka had heard of Ryoan's wisdom and hoped to receive teaching, but when he arrived, he was shocked by the master's poverty. The hut contained almost nothing: a sleeping mat, one robe hanging on a peg, a single bowl, a few books. That was all. No furniture, no decorations, no possessions of any kind. Tanaka couldn't hide his surprise. "Master Ryoan," he said, "forgive me for speaking directly, but where are your things?" "Don't you own anything?" Ryoan smiled. "I have everything I need. I have this hut that keeps rain off my head. I have this bowl that holds my food. I have these eyes that see the mountains. What more should I want?" "But surely you want comfort, security, beautiful things to enjoy." "I enjoy many beautiful things," Ryoan replied. "This morning I enjoyed the sunrise. This afternoon I enjoyed the sound of wind in the bamboo. Tonight I will enjoy the stars. I don't need to own any of these things to receive their gifts." Tanaka sat down, feeling suddenly heavy, despite the spacious emptiness of the hut. He thought about his own home filled with expensive furniture, rare artworks, collections of objects he had accumulated over the years. He had always felt proud of his possessions. But now he wondered if they had been possessing him instead. "How do you live with so little?" Tanaka asked. "How do you live with so much?" Ryoan counted gently. "Tell me, when you acquire something new, do you feel satisfied for long?" Tanaka had to admit he didn't. The pleasure of a new acquisition would fade within days or weeks, and then he would begin wanting something else. "And when you think about all the things you own, do you feel light or heavy?" Tanaka admitted. "I worry about protecting them, maintaining them, whether they might be stolen or damaged. So your possessions, which you thought would bring you happiness, have instead brought you worry and burden." Ryoan poured tea into his single bowl and offered it to Tanaka. "Not saying you should give away everything you own, but notice the difference between having things and being owned by them. Notice how much of your identity is wrapped up in what you possess." They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea from the same bowl. Tanaka looked around the empty hut and felt something unexpected. Instead of the poverty he had initially perceived, he now sensed a kind of richness. The space felt open, uncluttered, peaceful. "When you have little," Ryoan said, "you appreciate what you have more deeply. This bowl is precious to me because it's the only one I own. I wash it carefully. I'm grateful for its service. If I had 100 bowls, would any of them receive such attention?" Tanaka thought about his own possessions. How many things he owned that he barely noticed, took for granted, or had forgotten about entirely. "The weight you feel," Ryoan continued, is not just the physical burden of managing possessions. It's the mental burden of identifying with them. When you believe that having more makes you more, you can never have enough. But when you recognize what you are beneath all accumulation, you discover a fullness that possessions can never provide. This teaching about non-accumulation connects directly to the earlier insight about identity. Just as we construct a self out of roles and achievements, we also try to build ourselves through accumulation. We collect experiences, possessions, accomplishments, relationships, treating them as proof of our worth or completeness. Zen Buddhism suggests that this accumulation, while natural, can become a burden. Each thing we identify with becomes something we must maintain and protect. Each achievement becomes part of a resume we must defend. Each experience becomes a story we must tell to prove we're living fully. But beneath this constructed self made of accumulated parts lies something that was never incomplete to begin with. This original nature doesn't need to be built or proven. It exists prior to all accumulation, complete in its simplicity. As you prepare for rest tonight, you might notice what you've been carrying, not just physical possessions, but mental accumulations. The achievements you've collected, the experiences you hold as proof of your identity, the roles you maintain, the image you project. All of these things have their place in daily life, but they don't need to come to bed with you. For these hours of rest, you can let them all go, trusting they'll be there tomorrow if you need them. There's a story told about the great Zen master Bank. He taught in a time of great interest in Buddhism, and students would travel from across Japan to study with him. Some came from wealthy families, others from poverty. Some were educated scholars, others simple farmers. Bank noticed that students would often introduce themselves with elaborate descriptions of their backgrounds. They wanted him to know who they were to understand their particular circumstances and challenges. One day he changed how he greeted new students. When they began their introductions, he would bow and say, "Welcome, but before you tell me who you've become, show me who you were before your parents were born." This puzzling instruction stopped people in their tracks. Before their parents were born, that was impossible. They didn't exist then. Exactly. Bank was pointing to something that exists before personal history, before family background, before all the circumstances that shape our individual stories. The you that exists before your story, Bang would explain, is what I'm interested in teaching. The you that has become someone specific. Well, that one already has plenty of teachers and opinions and advice, but the you that exists before all that one is often forgotten. Students who grasped this teaching discovered a profound freedom. They could still honor their personal histories and circumstances, but they were no longer imprisoned by them. They had found something that existed independent of whether their life story was successful or tragic, elevated or ordinary. One student, a farmer named Juro, was particularly struck by this teaching. He had always felt less worthy than the educated students at the monastery. He couldn't read many sutras. He didn't understand complex philosophy. He felt like a simple man in the presence of sophisticated practitioners. But Bank's question changed everything. Before his story began, before he became a farmer or a student or anything else, what was he in that moment? Before identity, there was no educated or uneducated, no sophisticated or simple. There was only the fundamental presence that would later take on all these forms. "Master Bank," Jiro said one day, "I think I finally understand the awareness. That's here right now. Listening to your words. This was here before I learned. I was supposed to feel inferior to educated people." "Yes," Bank replied, "and that awareness is not inferior or superior to anyone. It simply is." This recognition freed Jiro from a burden he had been carrying his entire life. He could still acknowledge the limits of his education without making them mean something about his fundamental worth. He was no longer his story. He was the awareness in which his story appeared. As you rest tonight, you can experiment with this same recognition. Before you became whoever you think you are, what was here? Before you accumulated your particular history, what was present? Before you learned your name and your role and your place in the world, what existed? This isn't about denying your story or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about finding the foundation that remains unchanged regardless of what story unfolds. When we touch this place, we discover a rest that doesn't depend on our identity being secure, or our reputation being intact, or our accumulations being preserved. In Zen practice, this recognition often comes not through effort, but through a kind of relaxing like Tan, forgetting his name, or Kenji too sick to maintain his perfect monk identity. Sometimes we discover our original nature when the constructed self temporarily falls away. Sleep offers this same opportunity each night. As we drift toward unconsciousness, the one who has been maintaining an identity all day finally stops working. The roles we play fade. The image we project dissolves. The possessions we identify with become irrelevant. What remains is the simple presence that doesn't need to be anyone at all. Zen Buddhism teaches that this letting go isn't a loss but a return. We're not losing ourselves in sleep. We're returning to what we were before we learned to be someone particular, and in that return we find the deepest rest possible. Tonight, as you settle toward rest, you can let this teaching support you. You don't need to figure out who you are or maintain any particular version of yourself. You don't need to hold on to your achievements or protect your accumulations. You can let all of that rest, trusting it will be there tomorrow if you need it. For now, you can be what you were before you learned your name, before you became someone, before identity required maintenance, before accumulation seemed necessary. Just this breath, just this moment, just awareness itself, requiring nothing, owning nothing, becoming no one, simply here. Zen Buddhism has a surprising relationship with difficulty. Rather than viewing challenges as obstacles to overcome or problems to avoid, Zen teaching suggests that difficulty often becomes our greatest teacher. Not because suffering is good, but because our response to difficulty reveals something important about the nature of peace. Most of us believe that peace comes from having everything go smoothly. We think we'll finally relax when all our problems are solved, when circumstances align perfectly, when life stops presenting challenges. But Zen practice points to a different kind of peace, one that can exist even in the middle of difficulty. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist or forcing yourself to be happy when things are hard. It's about discovering a stability that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect. In a small village, there was a gardener named Kuuji who took great pride in his work. He tended the gardens of a wealthy family, creating beautiful arrangements of flowers and carefully pruned trees. Everything had to be perfect. Every leaf in its right place, every branch shaped exactly as it should be. One spring, Kuuji planted a bed of rare orchids that had taken him months to acquire. He watched over them carefully, protecting them from too much sun, too much rain, any threat to their delicate beauty. The orchids bloomed magnificently, and Kuuji felt deep satisfaction. Then one morning he arrived to find that wild vines had grown through the garden overnight. They had wrapped around his precious orchids, choking some of them, pulling others from the soil. Kuuji was devastated, weeks of work destroyed. He spent the entire day pulling out the vines, trying to save what orchids he could. He was angry, frustrated, muttering to himself about the unfairness of it all. By evening he had cleared most of the damage, but several orchids were lost. An old monk named Su, who sometimes walked through the village, happened to pass by as Kuuji was finishing his work. He saw the gardener's distress and sat down on a nearby bench. "Difficult day?" So asked. Kuuji explained what had happened, his voice still tight with frustration. "I did everything right, I was so careful. And now this disaster," nodded sympathetically. "May I ask you something?" Did you learn anything today? Kuji looked at him in surprise. Learn? I learned that vines can destroy a garden overnight, and I need to check for them more regularly. And Kuji paused, thinking, I suppose I learned which orchids are more resilient. The ones that survived are stronger varieties. What else I learned? Kuji stopped, considering. I learned that I can't control everything no matter how careful I am. So smiled gently. So this disaster, as you call it, taught you several valuable things. It showed you what works and what doesn't. It revealed which plants are truly strong. It reminded you that gardens, like life, have their own way of unfolding that includes both beauty and difficulty. But I lost so much work. Kuj protested. Yes, you did. And that loss is real, and your disappointment is natural. But notice how you're turning one difficulty, the lost orchids, into double suffering by fighting against the reality of what happened. Over the following weeks, Kuji found himself thinking about Suha's words. He began to notice how his gardens taught him more through difficulty than through easy success. When plants thrived without effort, he learned little. But when something went wrong, he had to pay attention, adapt, understand the plants more deeply. He started approaching his work differently. He still did his best to create beautiful gardens, but he no longer demanded perfection from every moment. When difficulties arose, instead of seeing them as disasters, he began to see them as information. What was this difficulty teaching him? Years later, people would say that Kuji's gardens had a particular quality to them. They were beautiful, yes, but they also had a natural, unforced feeling. When asked about his secret, Kuji would smile and say, I learned to garden with reality instead of against it. This teaching about learning from difficulty is central to Zen Buddhism's practical wisdom. We tend to divide our experiences into two categories, the ones we want and the ones we don't want. We spend enormous energy trying to have only positive experiences and avoid negative ones, but Zen suggests that this division itself creates suffering. Life includes both ease and difficulty, pleasure and pain, success and failure. When we resist this natural rhythm, we add a layer of struggle to every difficult moment. Think about how you typically respond when something goes wrong. Perhaps your immediate reaction is to think this shouldn't be happening. Or why is this happening to me? This resistance to what is already happening doesn't change the situation, but it does create additional suffering. There's a difference between pain and suffering that Zen Buddhism explores carefully. Pain is the inevitable experience of being human. Bodies get sick, relationships end, plans fail, losses occur. This is the first arrow we talked about earlier, the unavoidable difficulties of existence. But suffering is what we add to pain through our resistance and stories. When we fight against difficulty, insisting it shouldn't be here, creating elaborate narratives about unfairness, this is the second arrow. And often this second arrow hurts more than the first. A merchant named Taro once traveled to see a Zen master named Dogen. Taro had recently lost his business to a fire. Everything he had built over 20 years was gone. He was consumed with bitterness and anger. Master Dogen, he said, I did everything right. I worked hard. I was honest. I took care of my employees, and now I've lost everything. How can this be fair? Dogen listened quietly. When Taro finished, the master said, You're carrying two burdens, the loss itself, which is heavy enough, and your belief that it shouldn't have happened, which makes it unbearable. But it shouldn't have happened. I didn't deserve this. The fire doesn't care about deserve, Dogen replied gently. It burns what it burns. The question isn't whether it should have happened. It already did happen. The question is whether you'll carry the burden of insisting reality should be different. So I'm just supposed to accept losing everything. Accept that it happened. Yes. That's different from liking it or approving of it. Acceptance means acknowledging what is, not pretending to be happy about it. Taro sat with this for a while. But if I accept it, doesn't that mean him giving up? Shouldn't I fight to rebuild? You can rebuild from a place of acceptance or from a place of resistance, Dogen explained. When you resist what happened, you waste energy fighting with the past. When you accept what happened, all your energy becomes available for responding to the present. Over the months that followed, Taro experimented with this teaching. Instead of spending his mental energy on this shouldn't have happened, he began to ask, given that this happened, what now? Instead of rage at the unfairness, he felt sadness for his loss, which was painful, but somehow cleaner, less consuming. He found that from this place of acceptance, he could actually think more clearly about rebuilding. His decisions were no longer driven by anger or the need to prove something. He could respond to his actual circumstances rather than fighting with reality. Within 2 years, Taro had built a new business, but more importantly, he had discovered a different relationship with difficulty. He no longer divided life into what should and shouldn't happen. He simply met what came with as much wisdom and skill as he could manage. This teaching about acceptance connects to another core insight of Zen Buddhism: impermanence. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same. What we build will eventually fall apart. What we love will eventually be lost. This isn't pessimism, but simple observation of how things are. Most of us know this intellectually, but we don't really believe it. We act as if the good things will last forever and the difficult things will never end. Both beliefs cause suffering. In a monastery, there was a young monk named Ichiro who had a beautiful ceramic bowl. It had been a gift from his teacher, and he treasured it deeply. He used it for his meals, washed it carefully, kept it safe. One day, while walking through the monastery with the bowl, Ichiro tripped. The bowl flew from his hands and shattered on the stone floor. Ichiro stood there devastated, staring at the pieces. His teacher, Master Ikkyu, happened to see this happen. He walked over and stood beside Ichiro, looking at the broken bowl. "I'm so sorry," Ichiro said, tears in his eyes. "The bowl you gave me, I've destroyed it. I destroyed it," Ikkyu replied calmly. "No, Master, I dropped it before that. I destroyed it when I gave it to you." Ichiro looked confused. "I don't understand. From the moment I placed this bowl in your hands," I explained, "it began its journey toward breaking. Not today, perhaps, but someday. Every bowl breaks eventually. Everybody dies. Every relationship ends. Everything made comes unmade. I destroyed the bowl by creating the conditions for you to become attached to something that was always temporary. So, I shouldn't have cared about it." "No," I said gently. "Care deeply, love completely, but know that everything you love is already on its way to changing form. This knowledge doesn't make love less precious. It makes it more precious because you know it won't last forever." Ichiro carefully gathered the pieces of the bowl. That evening he placed them in his room as a reminder, not as a punishment, but as a teaching. These broken pieces spoke more clearly than the perfect bowl ever had about the nature of existence. Years later, when Ichiro became a teacher himself, he still kept those pieces. Students would ask about them, and he would tell the story. "This broken bowl teaches me something every day," he would say. "It reminds me to appreciate what I have while I have it, and to release it gracefully when it goes." This teaching about impermanence isn't meant to make us sad or prevent us from loving things. It's meant to free us from the suffering that comes from expecting permanence in an impermanent world. When we understand that everything changes, we can hold things more lightly. We can enjoy the beautiful bowl without needing it to last forever. We can love people fully while knowing that all relationships eventually end, whether through death or change. We can pursue goals knowing that achievement isn't a permanent state. This acceptance of impermanence actually allows us to be more present. When we're not constantly worried about things changing or trying to freeze moments in time, we can actually experience those moments more fully. A farmer named Yuko once asked a visiting monk, "How can I enjoy my life when I know everything will be taken from me eventually? My health will fail, my loved ones will die." Even the land I farm will someday belong to someone else." The monk smiled. "How can you not? Enjoy your life when you know everything's temporary right now. This moment you have your health, you have your loved ones, you have this land. These gifts are more precious precisely because they won't last forever, but the thought of losing them makes me anxious." "You're already losing them," the monk replied. "This moment is passing even as we speak. Your children are growing older, your body is changing, the season is turning loss. Isn't something that will happen in the future. It's happening now constantly as everything flows and changes. That sounds even more frightening, only if you fight against it. But watch a river. Does it grieve each moment of water that flows past? Does it try to hold on to any particular wave? It simply flows, and in that flowing, it's fully alive." Yasuko thought about this often as she worked in her fields. She began to notice how each season brought its own gifts and then moved on. Spring blossoms fell to make way for summer fruit. Summer's abundance faded into autumn's harvest. Autumn's colors dropped away for winter's rest. And each stage was perfect in its way, not in spite of its impermanence, but because of it. She learned to appreciate her life the way she appreciated the seasons, fully engaging with each moment while knowing it would pass. This didn't make her sad. It made her present. As you prepare for rest tonight, you might notice what you've been trying to hold on to. Perhaps you're clinging to how things used to be or trying to prevent inevitable changes. Perhaps you're fighting against the natural flow of life, wanting things to stay the same. Zen Buddhism invites us to practice a different relationship with change, not resignation or passivity, but an active engagement with life as it actually is, including its constant transformation. There's a particular application of these teachings to physical discomfort that can be helpful as we settle towards sleep. Many of us experience some physical discomfort as we lie down. Perhaps an ache, a tension, an uncomfortable sensation. Our typical response is to fight against this discomfort, to will it away, to tense up around it. But this resistance often makes the discomfort worse. A monk named Toyo suffered from chronic pain in his back for years. It disturbed his meditation and prevented restful sleep. He tried every remedy he could find, but the pain persisted. One night, unable to sleep because of the pain, Toyo went to speak with the monastery's oldest monk, a man named Joshu. "The pain is unbearable," Toyo said. "I can't sit. I can't sleep. I can't find peace. How do I make it stop?" Joshu looked at him with kind eyes. "Stop trying to make it stop. But it hurts, yes, it hurts. But you're creating two experiences, the pain itself and your fight against the pain. The fight is often worse than how can I not fight against pain? Feel exactly where the pain is." Joshu instructed. Not the story about the pain or what it means or how unfair it is, just the actual sensation itself. Toyo closed his eyes and brought his attention to his back. Instead of the massive, overwhelming pain he usually experienced, he found something more specific. A sharp sensation in one area, a dull ache in another, a tightness across his lower back. Notice that the pain changes moment to moment. Joshu continued, "It's not one solid block of suffering. It pulses, shifts, sometimes eases slightly, sometimes intensifies. Can you feel this movement?" As Toyo paid careful attention, he noticed that his experience of pain was constantly changing. It would sharpen, then ease slightly, then shift location. It wasn't the permanent solid wall of suffering he had been believing it to be. Now notice the space around the pain. Joshu said, "Your shoulders, are they in pain right now?" "No, your hands. So even with pain in your back, most of your body is actually comfortable in this moment." This awareness helped Toyo realize he had been tensing his entire body in response to localized pain. He was making his whole self into a fight against one difficult area. Over time, Toyo learned to feel pain without adding the suffering of resistance to it. The pain didn't disappear, but his experience of it changed completely. He could rest even while uncomfortable. He could find peace even while parts of his body hurt. This practice of being with difficulty without resistance is one of Zen Buddhism's most practical gifts. We can't always change our circumstances or eliminate discomfort, but we can change our relationship to what we're experiencing. When we stop fighting reality, even uncomfortable reality, something softens. The difficulty is still there, but we're no longer adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from insisting it shouldn't be. As you settle into rest tonight, you can practice this same gentleness with any discomfort that arises. Instead of tensing against it or trying to force it away, you might try simply being with it. Notice exactly where it is, how it feels, how it changes moment to moment. You might also notice the parts of your body that feel comfortable, the sensations that are neutral or pleasant. Often we focus so completely on what hurts that we miss the majority of our experience. That's actually fine. This isn't about forcing yourself to like discomfort. It's about meeting whatever is present with acceptance rather than resistance. And in that acceptance, you might find that the discomfort itself often begins to ease. Zen Buddhism teaches that peace isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the presence of acceptance, the willingness to be with life as it actually is, rather than how we wish it would be. This acceptance doesn't make us passive or resigned. It makes us responsive, able to meet each moment with clarity, rather than fighting with reality. Tonight, as you release into rest, you can let go of the exhausting work of resisting what is. Whatever is present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or difficult, wanted or unwanted, it's already here. Fighting against it won't change that, but accepting it might change everything. Zen Buddhism has a particular way of understanding our relationships with other people. It suggests that the difficulties we experience with others often reveal something important, not about them, but about ourselves. The irritation we feel, the judgments we make, the resentments we carry, these often say more about our own minds than about the people we're reacting to. This doesn't mean that difficult people aren't actually difficult. It means that our suffering about difficult people comes largely from how we hold them in our minds. Most of us carry others with us long after interactions end. Someone says something hurtful, and we replay it for days. Someone treats us unfairly, and we rehearse arguments with them in our thoughts. Someone disappoints us, and we build elaborate stories about their character and intentions. Zen practice invites us to put these burdens down, not because the other person deserves our forgiveness or because what they did was acceptable, but because carrying resentment hurts us more than it hurts them. In a village, there lived a shopkeeper named Masako, who prided herself on her fairness and honesty. She worked hard, treated customers well, and built a good reputation over many years. One day, a new merchant moved to the village and opened a shop near hers. This merchant, a man named Hideo, seemed to have no sense of honesty. He would lie about his goods, cheat customers when he could, and spread false rumors about other merchants to make himself look better. Masako watched with growing anger as Hideo's dishonest practices succeeded. People who didn't know better would shop at his store, believing his lies. Some even stopped coming to Masako's shop after Hideo told them false things about her. She found herself thinking about Hideo constantly. During the day, she would imagine confronting him. At night, she would lie awake angry about his latest deception. She would tell anyone who would listen about his dishonest behavior. A traveling monk named Ryokan stopped at Maso's shop one day. He noticed her agitation and asked what was troubling her. Masako poured out the whole story about Hideo's dishonesty and how unfair it all was. Ryokan listened carefully. When she finished, he asked this Hideo, "Does he think about you as much as you think about him?" "I don't know, probably not so. You're giving him space in your mind, rent-free, while he's likely not thinking about you at all." This simple observation struck Masako. She had been carrying Hideo around in her thoughts constantly, letting him disturb her peace, while he was probably going about his life without giving her a second thought. "But someone should do something about his behavior," she protested perhaps. "But is your constant anger helping with that? Is your resentment changing his behavior?" Masako had to admit it wasn't. Her anger was only making her miserable. It wasn't affecting Hideo at all. "Your anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die," Ryoin said gently. "It hurts you, not him. So I should just accept his dishonesty. You can recognize dishonesty without letting it consume you. You can respond to it practically without carrying it in your heart. The question isn't what Hideo deserves. The question is whether you want to continue poisoning yourself with resentment." Over the following weeks, Masako practiced a different approach. When she noticed herself thinking about Hideo, she would simply acknowledge the thought and let it pass. She stopped telling stories about him to customers. She focused on her own honest work instead of monitoring his dishonest behavior. Something unexpected happened. As she stopped feeding her resentment with constant attention, it began to fade, and as her mind became quieter, she could actually think more clearly about practical responses to the situation. She began keeping careful records of her own business practices, so any false rumors Hideo spread could be easily disproven. She treated her customers even better than before, building such strong relationships that rumors couldn't shake them. She let her work speak for itself instead of trying to expose Hideo's character. Within a year, most villagers had figured out Hideo's dishonesty on their own. His business declined while Masako's continued to thrive. But more importantly, Masako had learned something valuable. She had discovered that she could respond to difficulty without carrying it in her heart. This teaching about releasing resentment is central to Zen Buddhism's approach to relationships. We often believe that our anger at others is justified, that it serves a purpose, that it somehow holds them accountable. But resentment rarely serves these functions. Mostly it just makes us suffer. Think about someone you resent. Perhaps someone who wronged you, someone who treated you unfairly, someone who disappointed you. Now notice what happens in your body when you think about them. Does your jaw tighten? Your stomach clench? Your breathing becomes shallow? This physical response is happening in your body, not theirs. Your resentment is a burden you carry, not a burden you're placing on them. The person you resent might be sleeping peacefully right now, while you lie awake thinking about what they did. Zen Buddhism suggests that releasing resentment isn't about the other person at all. It's about refusing to let their actions continue to hurt you through your own thinking. There's a deeper aspect to this teaching about how we relate to others. Zen Buddhism invites us to look beneath surface behavior to the suffering that often drives it. People who act badly are usually people who are hurting badly. A monk named Hakuin had a young student who was causing problems in the monastery. This student Ki was angry, disruptive, disrespectful to others. The other monks wanted Ki expelled. They couldn't understand why Hakuin kept allowing him to stay. One day, one of the senior monks asked Hakuin directly, "Master, why do you tolerate his behavior? He's rude. He doesn't follow rules. He disturbs the peace of the monastery." "Why don't you send him away?" Hakuin replied. "Because he needs us most, but he doesn't seem to want to be here. He fights against everything we teach. That's how I know he needs us." Hakuin said, "People who are at peace don't fight everything. Ki's anger tells me he's in great pain." Over time, Hakuin learned Ki's story. The young man had grown up with a violent father who beat him regularly. He had learned that the world was dangerous, that showing vulnerability led to pain, that he had to fight constantly to protect himself. Hakuin understood that Ki's disruptive behavior wasn't about the monastery or the other monks. It was about old wounds he was carrying. Every time someone tried to teach him, he heard his father's criticism. Every time someone showed kindness, he suspected manipulation. His anger was a defense against pain that had nothing to do with present circumstances. With this understanding, Hakuan approached Ki differently. He didn't excuse the behavior or pretend it was acceptable, but he responded to the pain beneath the behavior rather than just reacting to the surface actions. When Ki was rude, Hakuin would calmly set boundaries without attacking his character. When Ki lashed out, Hakuin would give him space without abandoning him. When Ki showed small moments of openness, Hakuin would notice and acknowledge them. Very slowly, over many months, Ki began to change. The constant fighting began to ease. He started to trust that this place was different from his childhood home. He began to lower his defenses. Years later, Ki became one of the monastery's gentlest monks. When difficult students would come, he understood them in ways others couldn't. He had learned that the people who seem hardest to love are often the ones who need love most desperately. This teaching about seeing beneath surface behavior doesn't mean we should tolerate abuse or pretend that harmful actions are acceptable. It means we can respond to difficulty while still recognizing the humanity of difficult people. When someone treats us badly, our immediate reaction is usually to see them as bad. We create a simple story. They're the villain, we're the victim. But Zen Buddhism invites us to notice that this simple story usually misses something important. The person who's cruel to you might be carrying wounds from their own experiences of cruelty. The person who's dishonest might be terrified of being vulnerable. The person who's controlling might feel deeply out of control inside. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does help us understand it. A teacher named Sangai once said, "When you see someone acting badly, remember that you're seeing the result of causes and conditions you don't fully understand. Everyone is doing their best with the understanding they have, even when their best is quite poor." This perspective can transform how we hold others in our minds. Instead of simple judgment, we can have compassion while still maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. In a town, there was a woman named Yuki who worked as a healer. People came to her with all sorts of ailments, and she treated each person with care and skill, but there was one man, Nu, who made her appointments difficult. Noru would arrive late, complain constantly, question her methods, and often refuse to pay the agreed price. Yuki found herself dreading his visits. She would tense up when she saw his name in her schedule. One day, after a particularly difficult session with Noru, Yuki complained to her friend, an old woman named Chiyo, who had studied Zen Buddhism for many years. "I don't understand why he's so difficult," Yuki said. "I treat him the same way. I treat everyone else, but he's never satisfied. He makes everything harder than it needs to be." Listened and then asked, "What do you know about Nu's life?" "Not much. I try to keep our interactions professional." "Maybe that's the problem," Chiyo suggested. "You're treating him the same as everyone else, but he clearly isn't like everyone else. He's carrying something that makes normal interaction difficult for him." This observation prompted Yuki to look at Nu differently. During his next visit, instead of immediately tensing up at his complaints, she asked him about his life. She learned that Nu lived alone and was quite ill. He came to see her because he was frightened about his health, but too proud to show vulnerability directly. His complaints were his way of staying engaged, without having to admit he was scared. His lateness came from anxiety about the appointments that made him pace around before leaving home. His questioning of her methods came from a desperate need to feel some control over his frightening health situation. His haggling over price came from genuine financial struggle that embarrassed him. Understanding these underlying causes didn't make Nora's behavior suddenly acceptable, but it changed how Yuki responded to it. She could set boundaries with compassion rather than irritation. She could see beneath the difficult surface to the frightened, sick, lonely man underneath. She began building a few extra minutes into his appointments, knowing he'd likely be late. She explained her treatments more thoroughly, understanding his questions as a need for control rather than distrust. She suggested a payment plan that eased his financial stress. No, Boris' behavior didn't transform overnight, but over time, as he felt genuinely understood rather than merely tolerated, he became somewhat easier. More importantly, Yuki stopped dreading their appointments. She had learned to respond to his pain rather than react to his behavior. This practice of looking beneath surface behavior is one of Zen Buddhism's gifts for peaceful relationships. Most people's difficult behavior is their attempt to cope with pain or fear or confusion. When we can recognize this, we can respond with wisdom rather than clear's throat mere reaction. This doesn't mean we accept harmful behavior or fail to protect ourselves. It means we see difficult people more completely, understanding that their behavior is usually about their own suffering rather than about us. As you prepare for rest tonight, you might notice who you're carrying in your mind. Perhaps someone who angered you today, someone who disappointed you recently, someone who hurt you long ago. These people are living rentry in your thoughts, disturbing your peace while they go about their lives. You can acknowledge what happened without continuing to give them space in your awareness. There's a practice from Zen Buddhism that can help with this release. It's sometimes called loving kindness or metta practice, though Zen approaches it with characteristic simplicity. You think of the person who's been difficult and silently say, "May you be at peace." Not because they deserve it, but because people at peace don't create suffering for others. When you wish peace for someone who harmed you, you're actually wishing for the conditions that would make them stop causing harm. A student once asked a Zen master, "How can I send loving thoughts to someone who hurt me badly?" "It feels dishonest," the master replied. "You're not sending love to their behavior, you're sending love to their suffering. The person who hurt you was hurting. If you could remove their suffering, they wouldn't have hurt you." So when you wish them peace, you're wishing for the very thing that would have prevented your pain. This reframe can make the practice more accessible. You're not pretending that harmful behavior was fine. You're recognizing that hurt people, and wishing for the healing that would stop the cycle. Tonight, if someone difficult comes to mind, you might try this practice, not as a forced forgiveness, but as a release. May you be at peace means may you find the healing that would make you stop causing suffering. This isn't about them. It's about you releasing the burden of carrying them in your thoughts. It's about recognizing that your peace doesn't depend on them changing or apologizing or understanding what they did. Your peace comes from your willingness to put down the weight of resentment. Zen Buddhism teaches that all beings share the same fundamental nature. Beneath our different behaviors and personalities, beneath our varying levels of confusion or clarity, we all share the same basic awareness, the same capacity for peace. When we see others this way, even difficult others, something softens. We can still maintain boundaries. We can still protect ourselves from harm. But we don't need to carry others as enemies in our hearts. Another story about relationships comes from the teachings of Master Dogen. A student once asked him, "How should I relate to people who make my life difficult?" Dogen replied, "The same way you relate to the rain. Rain doesn't check if you want it before it falls, it's simply part of the weather. Difficult people are the same. They're simply doing what their conditions make them do. You can carry an umbrella without hating the rain. You can protect yourself from difficult people without needing them to be different than they are." This teaching invites us to meet others with the same acceptance we bring to weather. Not because we like all weather, but because fighting with it is pointless. We respond to the conditions while remaining internally free. As you settle into rest, you can practice this same freedom. Let the difficult people in your life be who they are while you remain at peace. Let go of needing them to change or apologize or understand. Let go of the stories about them that run through your mind. For these hours of rest, you can be free from all relationship difficulties. Not because you've solved them, but because you've stopped carrying them. Tomorrow, you can engage with relationships again with fresh energy. But tonight you can rest in the simple peace that's available when we stop fighting with reality, including the reality of other people's imperfections. Everyone is struggling in their own way. Everyone is doing their best with the understanding they have. This includes you. This includes those who have hurt you. When we hold others with this gentle awareness, we often find that the weight we've been carrying begins to lift all on its own. One of the most transformative insights in Zen Buddhism is this: most of what we take seriously doesn't need to be taken seriously. Not because life doesn't matter, but because taking things too seriously often prevents us from responding to them with clarity and grace. We walk through life treating every difficulty as a crisis, every setback as a disaster, every criticism as a wound. We carry the weight of our circumstances with heavy solemnity, believing this heaviness somehow shows we're taking life seriously enough. But Zen teaching suggests that lightness is often wiser than heaviness. When we hold our concerns more gently, we can actually address them more effectively. When we stop making everything into such a big deal, we often discover that most things weren't such a big deal to begin with. In a village, there was a potter named Fumiko who took great pride in her work. Each bowl, each cup, each vase was created with careful attention. She wanted every piece to be perfect, and she would work late into the night, never satisfied with her creations. One day, after finishing what she considered her finest bowl yet, she placed it on a high shelf to dry. Her young nephew was visiting and running through the workshop, accidentally knocked the shelf. The bowl fell and shattered into dozens of pieces. Fumiko's first reaction was anger, then grief. This had been her best work. Hours of careful effort destroyed in an instant. She felt her chest tighten, tears beginning to form, but then something unexpected happened. She looked at her nephew's terrified face and suddenly found herself laughing, not a bitter laugh, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. Here she was about to make a child feel terrible over some clay and glaze. "It's all right," she said, her laughter continuing. "It was just a bowl, but it was your finest work," her sister said, having rushed in when she heard the crash. "Was it?" Fumiko replied, still smiling. "I make bowls. This one broke, so I'll make another. Maybe it will be even better, or maybe it won't. Either way, it's just clay." Her sister was surprised by this response. Usually Fumiko was so serious about her work, so precious about each piece. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling more all right than I have in years," Fumiko replied, realizing something as she spoke. "I've been treating each bowl like life or death, as if my worth as a person depended on every piece being perfect. How exhausting that's been." She looked at the broken pieces on the floor. "You know what? This broken bowl just taught me more than years of perfect ones. It taught me that I can survive imperfection, that the world doesn't end when things break, that taking myself so seriously has been making me miserable." From that day forward, Fumiko still created beautiful pottery, but with a different energy. She worked with joy rather than grim determination. When pieces cracked in the kiln, she shrugged and tried again. When a glaze didn't turn out as expected, she found it interesting rather than devastating. Other potters noticed the change in her work. Her pieces had a freedom to them now, a playfulness that hadn't been there when she was taking everything so seriously. When asked about this transformation, she would tell the story of the broken bowl and say, "I learned that the lighter I hold my work, the better it becomes." This teaching about holding things lightly is one of Zen Buddhism's most practical gifts. Most of what troubles us doesn't need the weight we give it. We can care deeply about things without making them into matters of ultimate importance. We can try our best without treating every outcome as a referendum on our worth. Think about what you take seriously in your own life, your work, your relationships, your image, your possessions. Now imagine holding all of these just a bit more lightly, not carrying less, but carrying the weight differently. When we lighten our grip, we often find we can actually handle things better. The rigid control that comes from taking everything too seriously often makes us less effective, not more. The ability to laugh at ourselves, to see situations with some perspective. This often brings more wisdom than heavy seriousness. A merchant named Ichiro once traveled to visit a Zen master named Renzai. Ichiro was deeply worried about a business deal that wasn't going well. He had invested heavily, and it looked like he might lose a substantial amount of money. "Master Renzai," Ichiro said, "I'm facing potential ruin. This business deal could cost me everything. I can't sleep, I can't think about anything else. How do I handle such a serious situation?" Renzai listened and then asked, "In 100 years, will anyone remember this business deal?" "Probably not," Ichiro admitted. "In 100 years, will anyone remember you?" "No, I suppose not. In 100 years, will it matter at all whether this deal succeeded or failed?" "No." "Then why are you treating it like the most important thing in the universe right now?" Ichiro felt irritation at this response. "Because it affects my life now. The consequences are real for me and my family." "The consequences are real," Renzai agreed, "but are they as heavy as you're making them? You're acting as if your entire existence depends on this one deal. But you existed before this deal and you'll exist after it, whatever the outcome. But my reputation, my livelihood, yes, those might change. And if they do, you'll respond to the new circumstances. Humans are remarkably adaptable. But you're suffering now, not because of what's actually happening, but because of how seriously you're taking what might happen." Renzai smiled gently, not saying "don't care," saying "notice the difference between caring and making something into a catastrophe. You can address your business situation with full attention while holding it all more lightly." Over the following weeks, Ichiro experimented with this lighter approach. When worried thoughts about the deal would arise, he would notice them and think, "In 100 years, none of this will matter." This perspective didn't solve his business problems, but it did ease his mental suffering about them. Interestingly, with less anxiety clouding his mind, he actually made better decisions about the situation. The deal didn't end up working out and he did lose money, but he found he could handle this loss much more gracefully than he had imagined. It was disappointing, yes, but not the catastrophe he had built it up to be in his mind. Years later, Ichiro would say that losing that business deal was one of the best things that happened to him. Not because of the loss itself, but because it taught him how to hold life more lightly. This teaching about perspective connects to another aspect of Zen Buddhism, the practice of questioning our thoughts. We often accept our thoughts as absolute truth, believing everything our mind tells us, but Zen invites us to examine thoughts more carefully. A monk named Dai had developed a habit of constant mental commentary. Whatever happened, his mind would immediately generate opinions, judgments, and stories about it. A bird would fly past, and his mind would say, "That's a nice bird," or "Birds are annoying." Another monk would walk by, and his mind would create a story about what they were probably thinking. This constant mental chatter exhausted Dai. His mind never rested because it was always commenting on everything. One day his teacher, Master Ikkyu, asked him a simple question: "Is that thought necessary?" Dai was confused. "Necessary? I don't understand. When you think, 'That's a nice bird,' is that thought necessary? Does it serve any purpose?" Dai had never considered this before. "I suppose not. It's just what my mind does exactly, and that's the problem. Your mind is doing all sorts of unnecessary work. It's like leaving every light in your house on all the time. You're wasting energy." I taught Dai to pause before each thought and ask, "Is this necessary?" Not every thought, which would be exhausting in itself, but the habitual streams of commentary and judgment. Dai began to notice how many of his thoughts served no purpose at all. The judgment about the bird didn't help him or the bird. The story about what another monk was thinking was usually wrong anyway. The constant comparing and evaluating and narrating was just noise. As he learned to let unnecessary thoughts pass without engaging with them, something remarkable happened. His mind became quieter naturally, not through effort or suppression, but through simply not feeding the unnecessary mental chatter. One morning, sitting in meditation, Dai watched a bird fly past the window. No thought arose about whether it was nice or annoying. He simply saw the bird. This direct experience without mental commentary was vivid and fresh, in a way his thoughts about birds had never been, Master. EQ Dai said later, beginning to understand, most of my thoughts aren't necessary at all. They're just habits. Yes, I replied, and once you see this, you can let them go without trying to force them away. They arise, you recognize they're not necessary, and they dissolve on their own. This practice of questioning whether thoughts are necessary can be particularly helpful as we prepare for rest. The mind often becomes very active at bedtime, generating all sorts of thoughts about the day just past and the day to come. But if we pause and ask, is this thought necessary right now? We often find the answer is no. Planning tomorrow's schedule isn't necessary at bedtime. Reviewing today's conversation isn't necessary right now. Worrying about that upcoming event isn't helping anything in this moment. When we recognize that a thought isn't necessary, we don't have to fight with it or push it away. We simply acknowledge this thought isn't needed right now and return our attention to the present moment. The thought often dissolves on its own when we stop feeding it with our engagement. A weaver named Yuri discovered this practice in a difficult period of her life. A fire had destroyed her workshop and most of her materials. She faced the prospect of rebuilding everything from nothing. Her mind would generate constant worried thoughts about money, about replacing her tools, about what the other weavers in town must be thinking. A monk who sometimes visited the village suggested she try asking whether each worried thought was necessary. At first, Yuri resisted. These thoughts are all necessary, she insisted. I need to think about these problems. Try it anyway, the monk suggested, just for one evening. Each time a worried thought arises, ask if it's necessary right now in this moment. That evening, Yuri tried the practice. A thought arose. What if I can never afford to rebuild my workshop, she asked. Is this thought necessary right now? She realized it wasn't. Worrying about whether she could rebuild wasn't actually helping her rebuild. Another thought, the other weavers probably think I was careless to let this happen. Is this necessary? No. She didn't actually know what others thought, and it didn't matter anyway. Another thought, I should be planning every detail of the rebuilding right now. Is this necessary? She had already spent the afternoon making practical plans, going over them again in the evening once and revealing anything new. As Yuri practiced questioning her thoughts, she noticed something surprising. Very few of her worried thoughts were actually necessary. Most were just her mind spinning anxiously without any productive purpose. The thoughts that were necessary, like I need to speak with the carpenter about materials, she could write down and address the next day. But the majority of her mental activity was just unnecessary suffering. She was creating through habitual worry. Over time, this practice transformed Yuri's experience of difficulty. She still faced real challenges with rebuilding and finances, but she stopped adding layers of unnecessary mental suffering on top of the actual circumstances. There's another beautiful teaching in Zen Buddhism about how we relate to pleasant experiences. Just as we cling to people and things, we also try to capture and possess experiences. But Zen suggests we can enjoy things more fully when we don't try to own them. A painter named Satoshi lived in a small house near a lake. Every evening, the sunset over the lake was spectacular, painting the water in brilliant colors. Satoshi loved these sunsets and would try to capture them in his paintings. But he was never satisfied with his paintings. They never quite captured the beauty he witnessed. He would work on painting after painting, trying to preserve the sunsets, becoming frustrated when his art fell short of the reality. One evening, an old woman named Chio was walking past his house as he painted frantically, trying to capture the sunset before it faded. "Beautiful sunset," Chio observed. "Yes," Satoshi said, without looking up from his canvas, "but it's fading too quickly. I'm trying to capture it before it's gone," Chio asked simply. Satoshi looked at her in surprise. "So I can keep it, so I can have this beauty whenever I want. But you have it right now. You're just not enjoying it, because you're too busy trying to capture it." Satoshi realized she was right. He was so focused on painting the sunset that he wasn't actually experiencing it. He was trying to possess it rather than simply receiving it. Chio sat down on a bench near his easel. "Watch with me," she said. Together they watched the sunset unfold without any attempt to capture or preserve it. The colors shifted and changed moment by moment. The entire performance lasted perhaps 20 minutes, and then it was over. "Did you enjoy that?" Chio asked. "Yes," Satoshi said, surprised by how much more vivid the experience had been when he wasn't trying to capture it. "Will you remember it?" "I think so. Not every detail, but the feeling of it, yes." "Then you have it. Not in a painting that tries to freeze a living moment, but in your actual experience. This is a different kind of having, one that doesn't require possession." From that evening on, Satoshi's relationship with beauty changed. He still painted, but not with the desperate attempt to capture and preserve. He painted from memory and feeling, allowing his paintings to be interpretations rather than attempts at possession. He found that he enjoyed sunsets much more when he wasn't trying to own them. The same was true of music, of conversations with friends, of pleasant experiences of all kinds. When he stopped trying to capture and keep them, he could actually be present for them. This teaching about enjoying without possessing speaks to a fundamental insight in Zen Buddhism. We suffer not because beautiful things fade, but because we try to make them permanent. We try to freeze moments that are meant to flow. We try to own experiences that are meant to be received and released. When we learn to appreciate beauty without needing to capture it, we discover a freedom in our enjoyment. We can be fully present to each moment because we're not simultaneously trying to preserve it for later. As you prepare for rest tonight, you might notice any ways you're trying to hold on to experiences. Perhaps replaying pleasant moments, trying to capture them in memory. Perhaps already missing something that's still happening. Zen practice invites us to be present to each moment as it unfolds, receiving it fully and then releasing it so the next moment can come. This isn't about not remembering or not caring. It's about experiencing life as it actually is, a flowing river rather than a series of captured photographs. There's a story about a Zen master who was asked, "What is enlightenment?" He replied, "When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep." The student was confused. "Doesn't everyone do that?" "No," the master said. "When most people eat, they're thinking about 1,000 other things. When they sleep, they're worrying about tomorrow. When they walk, they're somewhere else in their minds." Enlightenment is simply being completely present to what you're actually doing. This complete presence is what Zen Buddhism has been pointing to all along. Not some special state to achieve, not some complex philosophy to master, but simply being here now, fully present to this moment without adding layers of thought, judgment, resistance, or grasping. As you settle into rest tonight, you can practice this same presence. When lying down, simply lie down. When breathing, simply breathe. When thinking arises, simply notice thinking. When it passes, simply notice the space it leaves. You don't need to be anywhere else or anyone else. You don't need to figure anything out or accomplish anything. You don't need to take anything seriously or hold on to anything tightly. You can simply be here in this moment, exactly as you are. All the teachings we've explored tonight, releasing identity, understanding the mind, working with difficulty, relating to others. All of these point to the same fundamental peace. It's the peace that's available when we stop fighting with reality and simply meet life as it actually is. This peace isn't something you achieve through effort. It's something you discover when you stop creating obstacles to it through your own thinking and resistance. It's been here all along, waiting beneath the surface of your busy thoughts, ready to welcome you home whenever you're ready to stop running away. Tonight you're ready. You can let go of everything you've been carrying and rest in the simple truth of this moment. Nothing needs to be different. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be understood more deeply. Just this breath, just this moment, just this gentle release into rest. There's a famous saying in Zen Buddhism, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. This teaching points to something we often overlook. The more we think we know about something, the less we're actually able to see it. A beginner approaches each moment with fresh eyes. They see what's actually there rather than what they expect to see. They're open to surprise because they haven't yet decided how things should be. But as we gain experience, something shifts. We start seeing through the filter of what we already know. We stop looking at what's in front of us and instead see our ideas about what's in front of us. We mistake our map for the territory. Zen practice invites us to recover this beginner's mind, not by pretending we don't know things, but by approaching each moment as if we're meeting it for the first time. Even familiar things become fresh when we see them without the overlay of our assumptions. In a monastery, there was a teacher named Shunryu who had an unusual way of greeting his students each morning. Even students who had been with him for years, he would look at with the same curiosity and interest as if meeting them for the first time. One longtime student named Tenzo finally asked him about this. "Master Shunryu, I've been your student for 5 years, don't you know me by now?" Shunryu looked at him with genuine interest. "Tell me, are you the same person who arrived here 5 years ago?" "Well, no, I suppose I've changed." "Are you the same person you were yesterday?" Tenzo paused. "Not exactly. I'm a bit different each day." "Are you the same person you were this morning?" "I'm starting to understand. Every moment, everything changes," Shunryu explained. "If I think I know you, I'm relating to my memory of who you were, not to who you are right now. So I choose to meet you fresh each time, curious about who you are in this moment." This practice of seeing students fresh each time changed the entire atmosphere of the monastery. Students felt truly seen rather than treated according to fixed ideas. If someone had been struggling yesterday, Shunryu didn't assume they were still struggling today. If someone had been confident before, he didn't assume they weren't now feeling uncertain. One student who had developed a reputation for being lazy found this particularly freeing. Other teachers would see him and immediately think, "There's the lazy one." But Shunryu would look at him each day without that label, open to discovering who he was in that moment. Gradually, freed from being seen through the lens of his reputation, this student began to change. When someone expects you to be lazy, you often live up to that expectation. But when someone sees you fresh each time, you have permission to be different. Years later, that student became known as one of the most diligent monks in the region. When people expressed surprise at this transformation, he would say, "Master Shun taught me that I didn't have to keep being who I had been. Each moment was a chance to begin again." This teaching about beginning again connects to how we often trap ourselves with fixed ideas. We decide we're a certain kind of person, and then we live within those limits. We think, "Not good at this," or "I always do that," or "That's just how I am." These ideas become like prison walls we build around ourselves. But Zen Buddhism suggests that these fixed ideas are just thoughts, not truth. The person you were yesterday doesn't need to determine who you are today. The pattern you've had for years can end right now. Each moment offers a completely fresh start if we're willing to approach it with beginner's mind. A scholar named Jiro once traveled to visit a famous Zen master named Nansen. Jiro had studied Buddhism extensively. He had read hundreds of texts, memorized countless teachings, and could discuss complex philosophy with great sophistication. When he arrived at Nansen's temple, the master invited him for tea. As Nansen prepared the tea, Jiro began explaining all his knowledge about Buddhism. He talked about different schools of thought, about various interpretations of key texts, about debates between scholars. Nansen quietly poured tea into Jiro's cup. The cup filled, but Nansen kept pouring. The tea began to overflow, spilling onto the table and then onto Jiro's lap. "Stop!" Jiro protested. "The cup is full. No more will go in." Nansen stopped pouring and looked at Jiro calmly. "Like this cup, you are full of your own ideas and opinions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Jiro sat in stunned silence, tea dripping from his robes. He had come to learn, but his mind was so full of what he already knew that there was no room for anything new. "Master," Jiro said quietly, "I understand I've been so busy showing you what I know that I haven't been open to learning anything." "Knowledge is useful," Nansen replied, "but it can become a barrier when it prevents us from seeing directly. You've read many words about the moon, but have you looked at the moon itself?" Over the following days, Nansen taught Jiro to set aside his accumulated knowledge temporarily and experience things directly. Instead of thinking about meditation, just meditate. Instead of concepts about mindfulness, just be mindful. Instead of ideas about presence, just be present. At first, this was difficult for Jiro. His mind kept wanting to categorize and explain everything according to what he had learned. But gradually, he began to experience moments of direct seeing, unfiltered by concepts and ideas. One morning, while sweeping the courtyard, Jiro heard a stone hit bamboo. The sound was so clear, so immediate, that for just a moment his mind was completely empty of thoughts. In that moment he understood something that all his years of study had never revealed. "Master Nansen," he said later, "I've been reading about enlightenment for years, but I didn't understand it until I stopped thinking about it and just heard that sound." "Yes," Nansen smiled. "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. All your books were fingers pointing, but you kept studying the fingers instead of looking where they pointed." This teaching about direct experience is central to beginner's mind. We can know a lot about something without actually experiencing it. We can have many ideas about life without being fully present to life as it's actually happening. Think about your own experience. How often are you thinking about life rather than experiencing it? How often are you in your head conceptualizing and analyzing rather than being present to what's actually here? Beginner's mind invites us to set aside our concepts temporarily and meet reality directly. Not to throw away everything we've learned, but to not let our learning block our seeing. A farmer named Ha had worked the same field for 30 years. He knew every part of that land intimately. He knew where water pooled, which areas got the most sun, where the soil was richest. One spring morning, he was walking through his field when his young daughter came running up to him excited. "Father, come look. There are tiny blue flowers growing by the old stone wall. I've never seen anything so beautiful." Haruto was about to say yes, those grow there every spring, but something made him stop. Instead, he followed his daughter to the stone wall. She was right, the flowers were extraordinary. Delicate blue petals catching the morning light, dozens of them scattered along the base of the wall. How had he never really looked at them before? "Thank you for showing me," he said to his daughter. She looked surprised. "But you knew they were here, didn't you?" "I knew they grew here," Haruto replied, "but I had stopped seeing them. I would walk past them thinking those flowers without actually looking. You saw them fresh, the way I used to see them when I first worked this field." That day Haruto made a decision. He would try to see his familiar field with fresh eyes. the way his daughter saw it. Instead of walking through it lost in thought, assuming he knew every inch, he would look as if seeing it for the first time. What he discovered amazed him. The field he thought he knew completely was full of things he had stopped noticing. The way light moved across the furrows at different times of day, the patterns birds made as they searched for seeds, the subtle variations in color as crops grew. His farming actually improved because of this fresh seeing. He noticed things he had been missing, small changes that indicated problems before they became serious. But more than that, his work became enjoyable again. He wasn't just repeating familiar tasks, he was meeting each day's work with curiosity. Years later, Haruto would tell Utfarm, "I thought I knew my field because I had worked it for 30 years, but I was seeing my ideas about the field, not the field itself. My daughter taught me to look again." This teaching about familiar things becoming invisible is something we all experience. We stop seeing our homes because we know them too well. We stop really listening to people we know well because we think we already understand them. We stop experiencing our daily routines because they've become automatic. Beginner's mind asks, what if you saw your familiar world as if for the first time? What if you listened to a long-time friend as if you just met them? What if you experienced this moment, this breath, this sensation without the filter of "I know this already"? There's a particular application of beginner's mind to our own thoughts and feelings that can be helpful. We often believe we know our own minds completely. We think I'm an anxious person, or I'm not good with emotions, or this is just how I am. But these are ideas about ourselves, not direct experience. When we approach our inner life with beginner's mind, we might discover we're not who we thought we were. A monk named Genzo had always considered himself an angry person. Clear's throat, his temper was quick, and he would often feel rage at small irritations. He had decided this was simply his nature, something he had to accept about himself. One day, his teacher, Master Dogen, gave him an unusual instruction. The next time anger arises, don't assume you know what it is. Look at it with fresh eyes, as if you've never experienced anger before. The next time Genzo felt anger building, he tried this approach. Instead of thinking, "Here is my anger again," he looked at what was actually happening with curiosity. He noticed a sensation of heat in his chest, a tension in his jaw, thoughts moving quickly. But when he looked without the label anger, these were just sensations and thoughts, no different in kind from any other experience. He noticed that what he called anger wasn't one solid thing. It was a combination of physical sensations, thoughts, and something else underneath, perhaps hurt or fear. Most surprisingly, when he looked at anger this way, it didn't seem as overwhelming. It was still uncomfortable, but it wasn't the massive force he had believed it to be. It was just energy moving through his body, thoughts arising and passing, sensations that changed moment to moment. "Master Dogen," he said later, "I've been telling myself for years that I'm an angry person, but when I looked at anger with fresh eyes, I saw it wasn't this solid thing I thought it was. It was just a collection of changing experiences." "Yes," Dogen replied. "When we label something, we stop seeing it clearly. The word anger makes you think you know what you're experiencing, but each moment of anger is actually unique, different from every other moment." Beginner's mind sees this freshness. From that point on, Gen's relationship with anger transformed. He still felt angry sometimes, but he no longer identified as an angry person. Each arising of anger was new, different, and when seen clearly, much less solid than he had believed. This practice of seeing our inner experience with fresh eyes can be particularly helpful as we prepare for rest. We often approach sleep with fixed ideas. "I'm someone who has trouble sleeping," or "it takes me an hour to fall asleep," or "I always wake up during the night." But these are ideas, not truth. What if tonight is completely different? What if this moment of settling into rest has never happened before in exactly this way? What if your body's wisdom knows how to rest regardless of what you believe about your sleep patterns. Beginner's mind invites you to meet this moment of rest without bringing along all your ideas about sleep. Just this breath, just this sensation of lying down, just this gentle release, fresh and new. There's a story about a young child who visited a Zen temple with her parents. The monks were sitting in meditation, very still and serious. The child watched for a while and then asked her mother, "Why are they sitting so still?" Before the mother could answer, an old monk who overheard smiled and replied, "We're practicing noticing." "Noticing what?" the child asked. "Everything. The feeling of breathing, the sounds around us, the thoughts that come and go." "But I do that all the time," the child said, confused. "Why do you need to practice it?" The old monk laughed delightfully. "You're right. You do that naturally. We're practicing to remember how to do what you never stop doing." The child wandered off to play, but the old monk sat for a long time thinking about her words. Children have beginner's mind. Naturally, they see things fresh because they haven't yet accumulated layers of concepts and assumptions. They're endlessly curious because they don't think they already know everything. As adults, we lose this natural freshness. We build up so many ideas about how things are that we stop seeing how things actually are. Zen practice is about recovering what we once had naturally, the ability to meet each moment as if it's the first moment. Tonight, as you rest, you have an opportunity to practice beginner's mind. You've never experienced this exact moment before. This breath is completely new. This sensation in your body has never been felt in exactly this way. Even if you've lain in this bed 1,000 times, this moment of lying here is unique. When thoughts arise about sleep or rest or tomorrow, see if you can notice them with fresh eyes. Not this worry again, but here as a thought. Not I never sleep well, but here as a belief. Each thought is new, arising now for the first time in this particular moment. Beginner's mind doesn't require effort. It's actually about releasing effort. Releasing the work of maintaining all your ideas about how things are. It's about seeing what's here when you're not filtering everything through your concepts and beliefs. The peace that comes from beginner's mind is the peace of being fully present. When you're not carrying the past or projecting the future, when you're not filtered through ideas and assumptions, you're just here, and here is always fresh, always new, always offering itself completely. As you settle more deeply into rest, let yourself approach this moment with the same curiosity and openness you had as a child. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to figure anything out. You can simply be here, seeing what's actually present without the overlay of what you think should be present. This fresh seeing is always available. Each breath offers it. Each moment invites you to begin again, free from the weight of who you think you are or how you think things should be. Just this, just now. Just the gentle, fresh reality of being aware, being present, being here. One of the most practical teachings in Zen Buddhism is about contentment. Not the kind that comes from finally getting what you want, but contentment that comes from recognizing you already have enough. This recognition depends on circumstances being perfect or needs being met. It comes from seeing clearly what's actually present in this moment. Most of us live with a constant feeling of not enough time, not enough money, not enough success, not enough peace. We believe that contentment waits on the other side of achieving something, acquiring something, or becoming something different than we are. But Zen practice points to a different source of contentment. It suggests that fullness is always available, not because we have everything we want, but because we're fully present to what we have. There was a monk named Ryoan who lived in a small hut on the side of a mountain. His possessions could be counted on one hand. Clear's throat, one robe, one bowl, one mat for sleeping, a few books. That was all. Visitors would sometimes come to see him, and they were often shocked by his poverty. One wealthy merchant who climbed the mountain to seek his wisdom couldn't hide his pity. "Master Ryoan," the merchant said, You live with so little. Don't you want more comfort, more security? Rioan smiled and gestured toward the open doorway of his hut. Come, sit with me and watch the sunset. They sat together as the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The mountains in the distance turned purple. Birds called to each other as they settled for the night. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine. They sat in silence for a long time, just watching. When the last light faded, Rioan turned to his visitor. Did you enjoy that sunset? He asked. Very much. It was beautiful. How much did it cost you to watch it? Nothing, of course. And tomorrow when the sun rises, how much will that cost? Nothing, so you see, Rokan said gently. The most beautiful things in life cost nothing at all. I watch the sunrise every morning. I watch the sunset every evening. I listen to the rain on my roof. I feel the warmth of sun on my face. I taste the simplicity of rice in my bowl. I am rich beyond measure. The merchant looked around the bare hut again, but this time he saw it differently. There was a kind of spaciousness in the emptiness, a peace in the simplicity. Rioan wasn't suffering from lack. He was enjoying abundance that required no money at all. But what about security? The merchant asked. What if you get sick? What if winter is harsh? Don't you worry. Worry about what hasn't happened yet, Rioan replied. Right now I am healthy. Right now the weather is mild. Right now I have everything I need. Tomorrow will bring what it brings, and I will meet it when it arrives. The merchant stayed until late that evening talking with Rioan. When he finally left to return to his large house filled with possessions, he found himself thinking about the difference between having many things and being rich. He had worried constantly about protecting his wealth, growing his business, acquiring more. He had everything most people dreamed of. Yet he felt poor in a way he couldn't quite name. Rioan had almost nothing, yet seemed to lack nothing. This teaching about simplicity isn't suggesting everyone should give away all their possessions and live in a hut. It's pointing to something more fundamental. The feeling of having enough doesn't come from having a certain amount. It comes from being fully present to what you have. You could have very little and feel abundant if you truly appreciated what was present. You could have enormous wealth and feel impoverished if you were focused on what you lacked. A wealthy merchant named Hayato discovered this truth through an unexpected encounter. He had worked his whole life building a successful trading business. His home was filled with fine furniture, rare artworks, expensive clothing, yet he found himself constantly anxious, always wanting more, never quite satisfied. One day, while traveling through the countryside, his carriage broke down in a small village. While waiting for repairs, he watched a poor farmer working in his fields. The man was old, his clothing was patched, his tools were worn, yet he sang as he worked, and his face showed a contentment that Hayato had never felt, despite all his wealth. Curious, Hayato approached the farmer during his midday rest. "Forgive me," Hayato said, "but I'm puzzled you have so little, yet you seem happy. I have great wealth, yet am never content." "What's your secret?" The farmer looked surprised by the question. "Secret? I don't know about secrets. I just notice what's good." "What do you mean?" "Well, today the sun is shining, which is good for the crops. My back is strong enough to do the work. My wife made good rice for my meal. In the evening, I'll sit with my family. These are good things, aren't they? But don't you want more? Better tools, a bigger house, nice clothing." The farmer thought about this. Sure, those things would be pleasant, but wanting them doesn't make me have them, and not having them doesn't stop the sun from shining or the rice from tasting good. If I spend all my time wishing for what I don't have, I miss enjoying what I do have. This simple observation struck Hayato deeply. He had spent so much energy focusing on what he lacked, what he wanted to acquire, what he needed to protect, that he had forgotten to notice what was actually present in his life. When he returned home, he tried an experiment. Each evening before sleep, he would think of 3 things from that day that had been good. not extraordinary things, just simple good things that he might normally overlook. The first evening he struggled. His mind kept wanting to focus on problems and worries, but he forced himself to find three things: the taste of his morning tea, a kind word from one of his employees, the feeling of his comfortable bed. Over weeks and months, this practice changed something fundamental in Hayato. He began noticing goodness throughout his day, not just during his evening reflection. His wealth hadn't changed, but his experience of his life transformed completely. He discovered that he had always been rich in simple pleasures, but he had been too focused on accumulating more to notice them. This practice of noticing what's good is central to Zen Buddhism's approach to contentment. Not positive thinking that pretends difficulties don't exist, but genuine recognition of the good. That's actually present even in the middle of difficulty right now. For example, what's good? Perhaps you're lying somewhere comfortable. Perhaps you're breathing easily. Perhaps you're safe for this moment. Perhaps you're not in physical pain. These may seem like small things, but they're the foundation of genuine contentment. We often overlook what's working while we focus entirely on what's not working. We take for granted the countless ways our life is actually functioning while we stress about the few ways it's difficult. In a village, there was a woman named Akiko who had developed a reputation for complaining. Nothing was ever quite right. The weather was too hot or too cold. Her neighbors were too noisy or too distant. Her work was too hard or too boring. She had trained her mind to find fault with everything. One day she fell ill with a high fever. For 3 days she couldn't get out of bed. Her body ached, her head throbbed. Every breath seemed difficult. On the 4th day the fever broke. As Eiko slowly sat up, she felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Her body, which she had complained about as too fat or too old or too weak, had fought off the illness. Her bed, which she had criticized as too hard, had supported her through the difficult nights. Her neighbors, whom she had called too intrusive, had brought her food and medicine. That day, as she walked slowly around her house, everything looked different. The morning light coming through the window was beautiful. The simple taste of rice was delicious. The ability to walk to her garden without pain was a gift she had never appreciated before. I almost had to lose my health to discover. I had it, she thought. What else have I been overlooking? From that day forward, Akko practiced noticing what was working in her life, not to ignore problems, but to balance her awareness. Yes, some things were difficult, but many things were actually fine, even good. She had trained herself to see only lack. Now she learned to see abundance as well. Years later, people noticed that Akko seemed to have more, even though her circumstances hadn't changed. When asked about this, she would say, "I don't have more, I'm just finally seeing what I always had. This seeing what we have is different from settling or giving up on improvement." Zen Buddhism doesn't suggest we should never want things to be better. It suggests that our well-being doesn't need to wait for things to improve. We can be content now while still working toward positive change. There's a story about a tea master named Senor Riku, who was famous for his simple approach to the tea ceremony. While other tea masters used expensive ceramics and elaborate decorations, Riku preferred simple rough tea bowls and unadorned rooms. A wealthy lord once asked him, "Why do you use such plain, cheap bowls for your tea ceremony? Surely a master of your reputation could afford the finest ceramics." Riku picked up one of his simple tea bowls, turning it slowly in his hands. "This bowl was made by a village potter," he said. "Look at how the glaze has pulled unevenly here. See this slight wobble in its shape. Notice this rough texture where the potter's thumb pressed into the clay." "Exactly," the Lord said, "it's imperfect. Why not use a perfect bowl?" "Because perfection is cold," Riku replied. "This bowl shows the maker's hand. It shows the natural variation of fire and clay. It's alive in a way that a perfect bowl never is. When I drink tea from this bowl, I'm touching something real. something made with care by human hands, something unique in all the world. He poured tea into the bowl and offered it to the Lord. Expensive things often make us anxious. We worry about breaking them, about whether others are impressed by them. But this simple bowl asks nothing of me. It just holds tea. Honestly, this is enough. The Lord drank from the simple bowl and found that the tea somehow tasted better than tea from his expensive cups. Not because the bowl changed the flavor, but because his mind was quiet, not busy trying to impress or protect. I think I understand, the Lord said. Simplicity isn't about having less. It's about wanting less from what you have. Yes, Riku smiled. This bowl doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. And when we stop needing things to be more than they are, we discover they're already complete. This teaching about things being complete as they are extends to our own lives. We often feel we need to be more, do more, have more to be okay. But what if we're already complete? What if this moment exactly as it is enough? This doesn't mean we stop growing or improving. A tree is complete as a seed, complete as a sprout, complete as a mature tree. At each stage, it's fully what it is. We can be complete right now while still naturally unfolding into whatever comes next. As you rest tonight, you might notice this sense of completeness. Not perfection, but wholeness. You don't need to be different than you are in this moment. You don't need to achieve anything or become anyone. Right now, as you are, you're enough. Your breath is enough. This moment of rest is enough. The simple fact of being aware, being here, being alive, this is enough. Zen Buddhism teaches that contentment isn't found in getting what we want, but in wanting what we have, not as a way of giving up on dreams or settling for less, but as recognition that fulfillment is always available in the present moment. A young monk once asked his teacher, "When will I be enlightened? When will I finally have peace?" The teacher replied, "When you stop needing to be enlightened. When you stop needing peace to be different than this moment, but in not at peace now. Aren't you right now? Are you okay right now? Are you breathing right now? Are you alive and aware?" Yes, but there is no but. Right now you're okay. The problem is you're comparing this okay moment to some imagined better moment. You're missing the peace that's here because you're looking for a different kind of peace somewhere else. This teaching invites us to recognize the peace that's available right now, not as a future achievement, but as a present reality. Not perfect peace, perhaps, but the genuine peace of being here, breathing, alive, okay in this moment. As you settle more deeply into rest, notice what's actually here, the support beneath you, the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the simple presence of awareness itself. You don't need anything more than this. This is enough. All the accumulation we do, all the achieving and acquiring, is often an attempt to create the sense of enough. That's already available. We think we need to build toward contentment, but contentment is what remains when we stop building tonight. You can rest in this enoughness. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be different. Just this breath, just this moment, just this complete, whole, enough. One of the deepest teachings in Zen Buddhism is about surrender. Not surrender as defeat or giving up, but surrender as a kind of wisdom. It's the recognition that some things cannot be controlled, and that trying to control them often creates more problems than it solves. We spend enormous energy trying to manage outcomes, force results, and make things happen according to our plans. But Zen practice suggests that there's another way. We can work with life instead of against it. We can respond to what is instead of fighting for what we think should be. This surrender isn't passive. It's actively letting go of what we can't control so we can respond skillfully to what we can influence. It's the difference between swimming against a current and learning to move with the water's flow. There was a ferryman named Tishi who worked on a wide river, carrying passengers from one bank to the other. He had learned his craft from his father, who had learned it from his father before him. 3 generations of knowledge about this river. One day, a young boatman who had just started working on the river came to Tishi for advice. "Master Taxi," he said, "I'm exhausted after every crossing. The current fights me constantly. How do you make it look so easy?" Tishi smiled. "Show me how you row." They went out in the young man's boat, and Tishi watched as he struggled across the river. The young man put all his strength into each stroke, fighting against the current, trying to force the boat to go exactly where he wanted it to go. When they reached the other side, Tishi said, "You're making the river your enemy. Every stroke is a battle, but I need to control the boat. If I don't fight the current, it will take me off course." "Let me show you something," Tishi said. On the return journey, he took the oars. Instead of fighting the current, he seemed to dance with it. When the water pushed one way, he adjusted slightly, using the river's force rather than opposing it. The boat moved smoothly, and Tishi barely seemed to be working. "You see," Tishi explained as they glided across the water, "the river has its own power. I can't control it, but I can work with it. When I feel the current pushing, I adjust. When I sense the water's direction, I use it. The river and I move together." "But what if you need to go exactly against the current?" "Sometimes I do need to cross straight. But even then I don't fight directly. I angle the boat so the current helps push me where I want to go. I let the water be my partner, not my opponent." The young boatman practiced this approach for many months. At first, it felt like he wasn't doing enough. He was so used to forcing and pushing that the gentle adjustment of working with the river felt like weakness. But gradually he learned to feel the water, to sense its movements, to let it carry him while guiding the direction. A year later, people would comment on how gracefully he moved across the river. When they asked his secret, he would say, "I learned to stop fighting with what I cannot control." This teaching about working with, rather than against, applies to so many areas of life. We exhaust ourselves trying to control things that have their own nature, their own momentum. We fight against reality instead of responding to it skillfully. Think about your own life. How much energy do you spend trying to force outcomes, trying to make people be different, trying to control circumstances that are largely beyond your influence? This forcing creates tension and exhaustion. Zen practice invites us to distinguish between what we can influence and what we cannot. We can let go of trying to control the uncontrollable and focus our energy on responding wisely to what's actually happening. A farmer named Koshi had worked his land for many years. He was known as a skilled farmer who understood the rhythms of the seasons, but he was also known as a warrior. He would fret constantly about whether rain would come at the right time, whether frost would arrive too early, whether summer would be too hot. One year, an old monk named Joshu was traveling through the region and stopped at Koshi's farm to rest. Koshi offered him food and shelter, and in the evening they sat together looking at the newly planted fields. "It's too dry," Koshi fretted. "If rain doesn't come soon, the seeds won't sprout properly." "Can you make it rain?" Joshu asked. "No, of course not." "Then why worry about it?" "Because my crops depend on rain. My livelihood depends on a good harvest." Joshu nodded. "I understand, but tell me, does your worry bring rain?" "No." "Does your worry help the seeds grow?" "No." "Does your worry make you a better farmer?" Koshi paused. "Actually, when I'm worried, I probably make worse decisions. I'm so anxious that I can't think clearly." "So your worry accomplishes nothing except making you suffer." Koshi had to admit this was true. His constant worrying about weather, which he couldn't control, was just creating stress without any benefit. "As a farmer," Joshu continued, "what can you actually control?" Koshi thought about this. "I can prepare the soil well. I can choose good seeds. I can plant at the right depth and spacing. I can protect the young plants from pests. When rain does come, I can direct water where it's needed most." So you have much to do, much that's within your influence. But the weather itself that you must surrender to. You must trust that rain will come or not come, regardless of your worry. Trust But what if the rain doesn't come? Then you respond to that reality when it arrives. Perhaps you dig a well. Perhaps you plant different crops next year. Perhaps you discover resources you didn't know you had. But worrying about it now doesn't help you respond skillfully when the time comes. It just exhausts you. Over the following season, Koshi practiced this approach. When worry about weather arose, he would acknowledge it, and then return his attention to what he could actually do. He couldn't control the rain, but he could prepare for different possibilities. He couldn't control frost, but he could protect his plants in ways that were within his power. Interestingly, the weather that year was quite challenging. Drought came early, followed by unexpected storms. But Kiyoshi found he handled these difficulties better than in previous years. Without the constant drain of worry, he had more energy to respond practically to each challenge as it arose. By harvest time, his yield wasn't the best he'd ever had, but it was respectable given the difficult conditions. More importantly, he had learned something valuable about where to place his energy. I used to think being a good farmer meant controlling everything, he told Joshu when the monk passed through again. Now I understand it means doing what I can and trusting what I cannot control. This teaching about trust isn't about blind faith that everything will work out perfectly. It's about recognizing that some things are beyond our control, and that accepting this reality allows us to respond more skillfully to what we can influence. There's a particular application of this teaching to sleep that's especially relevant. Sleep is something that happens to us, not something we do. We can create conditions for sleep, but we cannot force sleep to occur. The more we try to control sleep, the more elusive it becomes. A monk named Diki struggled terribly with sleep. Each night he would lie down with determination to fall asleep quickly. He would try different techniques, different positions, different breathing patterns. He would monitor his progress towards sleep, becoming frustrated when it didn't come fast enough. The harder he tried to force sleep, the more awake he became. The more he tried to control the process, the more it resisted him. He would lie awake for hours, tense with effort, willing himself to sleep. His teacher, Master Hakuin, noticed Daiki's exhaustion and asked about it. When Daiki explained his sleep difficulties, Hakuin said something unexpected. "Stop trying to fall asleep, but I need to sleep exhausted. Trying to fall asleep is like trying to fall in love, or trying to be happy. These things happen when we stop trying to make them happen. They arise naturally when conditions are right and we get out of the way. So what should I do? Create conditions for sleep. Then trust your body's wisdom. Lie down, let your body rest. If sleep comes, fine. If it doesn't come yet, also fine. Your body will sleep when it's ready. But what if I just lie awake all night?" Then you lie awake all night resting your body, even if your mind is active. This is better than fighting with yourself for hours. And usually when you stop fighting for sleep, sleep arrives on its own. That night, Daiki tried this approach. When he lay down, instead of trying to force sleep, he simply let his body rest. He didn't monitor whether he was falling asleep. He didn't try different techniques to make it happen faster. He just rested, trusting that sleep would come when it was ready. At first his mind was quite active as usual, but without the layer of struggle on top of the mental activity, something was different. The wakefulness was less distressing. He was just lying there resting and thoughts were happening. So what? He didn't notice the exact moment it happened, but at some point he fell asleep, and he slept more deeply than he had in weeks. Over time, Daiki learned to approach sleep with this same trust. He created good conditions, lay down and let go. Some nights sleep came quickly, some nights it took longer, but without the struggle, even the nights when sleep was slow went suffering. I was making sleep into an enemy I had to defeat. He told Hakuin later. When I stopped fighting and started trusting, it became a friend that visited naturally. This teaching about trusting the body's wisdom applies to so much more than sleep. Our bodies have intelligence that our conscious minds don't fully understand. The heart beats, the lungs breathe, wounds heal, food digests, all without our conscious management. Yet we often act as if we need to control everything, as if the body's wisdom isn't enough, as if we must force every process through conscious effort. This creates tension and exhaustion. Zen practice invites us to trust the natural intelligence that's already functioning. We can support it with good conditions, but we don't need to micromanage it. We can surrender to the wisdom of the body and let it do what it knows how to do. There was a master named Bang Kei who was famous for his effortless way of living. Students who came to study with him were often surprised by how little he planned or organized. Yet everything seemed to work out naturally. One student asked him, "Master, how do you accomplish so much, while seeming to do so little?" Bang smiled, "I don't try to make things happen. I simply respond to what wants to happen. There's a natural flow to life, like water flowing downhill. When I work with this flow, instead of against it, things happen easily, but surely you must plan and organize. I pay attention to what's needed when action is called for. I act when rest is needed. I rest when teaching is appropriate. I teach, I don't force any of it. I let each situation show me what it needs." That sounds like doing nothing. It's the opposite of doing nothing. It's doing exactly what's needed without wasting energy on what's not needed. Most people are very busy doing unnecessary things while missing what's actually important. The student watched Bang over the following weeks and saw this natural responsiveness in action. The master didn't seem to hurry or plan extensively, yet students got what they needed. The monastery functioned smoothly. Problems were addressed as they arose without drama or stress. "How do you know what to do?" the student asked. "I pay attention," Bang replied simply. "When you're not busy forcing your plans onto reality, you can see what reality is actually asking for, then you respond. This is much easier than trying to control everything." This teaching about natural responsiveness is at the heart of Zen Buddhism's approach to life. We don't need to force everything through effort and control. We can pay attention, respond to what's actually happening, and trust that appropriate action will arise when we're present. As you settle into rest tonight, you can practice this same trust. You don't need to force yourself to relax. You don't need to make sleep happen. You can simply create conditions for rest and then trust your body's wisdom to do what it knows how to do. Your body wants to rest. It knows how to rest. You don't need to micromanage the process. You can surrender to the natural intelligence that's been keeping you alive since before you were born. The intelligence that beats your heart and breathes your breath without your conscious effort. This surrender isn't giving up. It's giving in to what already wants to happen. It's stopping the fight and letting the natural process unfold. It's recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is get out of our own way. Trust that your breath knows its own rhythm. Trust that your body knows how to release tension. Trust that sleep will come when you stop demanding it arrive right now. Trust that rest is possible even when the mind is active. Trust the wisdom that's deeper than your conscious thoughts. Zen Buddhism teaches that we are held by something larger than our individual will. Call it life, call it nature, call it the way things are. This larger intelligence includes us and moves through us. When we stop fighting it and trying to control everything, we discover we can rest in it. Tonight, you can practice this rest, not by doing anything special, but by letting go of needing to do anything at all. Just being here, breathing, alive, held by the moment exactly as it is. Surrender isn't defeat. It's the wisdom of knowing what to hold and what to release. Tonight, you can release everything you've been trying to control and trust that you're okay without that control. You can let go and discover that letting go is sometimes the greatest strength of all. As our journey through Zen Buddhism's wisdom comes to its gentle close, you've traveled far, not in distance, but in understanding. You've touched something simple and profound that's been here all along, waiting beneath the surface of your daily thoughts. Tonight, you've explored how to release the burden of identity, discovering that beneath all your roles and labels lies a fundamental awareness that needs no maintenance. You've learned about the nature of mind, seeing that thoughts are like weather passing through the sky of consciousness, unable to disturb the spacious awareness that watches them come and go. You've met difficulty as a teacher rather than an enemy, learning that resistance often creates more suffering than the challenges themselves. You've discovered how to hold others more lightly in your heart, releasing the weight of resentment and seeing the pain beneath difficult behavior. You've found that peace doesn't come from taking everything so seriously, that most of what troubles us needs a lighter touch. You've practiced beginner's mind, approaching each moment fresh rather than filtered through old assumptions. You've recognized the contentment that comes not from having more, but from being fully present to what you have. And finally, you've explored the wisdom of surrender, learning to work with life rather than against it, trusting the natural intelligence that flows through all things. But you don't need to hold on to any of these teachings. You don't need to remember them or practice them. Like seeds planted in fertile ground, they'll grow in their own way and their own time. Your only task now is to rest. Let your breathing slow completely now. Feel yourself sinking deeper into whatever supports you. Notice how your body knows exactly how to rest when you stop trying to control the process. All the concerns of the day can wait until morning. All the plans for tomorrow can rest until tomorrow comes. Right now, in this moment, nothing needs your attention. Nothing requires solving. Nothing demands understanding. You can let go of being anyone particular. Let go of maintaining any image or identity. Let go of all the roles you play during the day. For these hours of rest, you can simply be the awareness that witnesses all experience without needing to be anything special. Your breath continues on its own. Your heart beats without your conscious effort. Your body knows how to heal and restore itself while you sleep. You can trust this wisdom that's deeper than thought, older than your conscious mind. As you drift towards sleep, know that you're not falling into unconsciousness, but returning to your most natural state. The awareness that's been here throughout tonight's journey doesn't disappear in sleep. It simply rests in itself, no longer busy with the work of being awake. Sleep is not an escape from life, but a return to the source of all life. In this deep rest, the boundaries that seemed so solid during the day naturally soften. The separation between self and world becomes less defined. You return to the wholeness that was here before any division arose. Let yourself release completely now. Release any remaining tension in your body. Release any lingering thoughts. Release the need to understand or accomplish or become anything at all. You are held by something larger than yourself, by the bed beneath you, by the moment itself, by the natural flow of life that carries all things. You can rest in this holding, trusting that everything necessary will take care of itself. The peace you've touched tonight isn't something you achieved. It's something you uncovered by removing what obscured it. This peace is always here, always available, always ready to welcome you home whenever you remember to stop running and simply be still. May your sleep tonight be deep and restorative. May you rest in the confidence that you are exactly where you need to be, exactly as you are. May you release all burden and know that this release is not weakness but wisdom. May you wake refreshed, carrying the gentle insights of tonight into whatever tomorrow brings. And may you remember, even if only faintly, that the peace you seek is never far away. It's as close as this breath, this moment, this simple presence. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at